In this lesson, we're going to look at the respiratory system, specifically the mammalian respiratory system, and ventilation. And here are your objectives. Now recall that gas exchange in the case of animals means bringing oxygen in and sending carbon dioxide out across a membrane. And it requires a large surface area to be most efficient, and it also doesn't proceed very well over large distances because gas exchange here is happening by diffusion. Diffusion is not efficient over large distances. So the gas exchange surface area, in addition to being large, also needs to be thin. And of course, to move those gases across the membrane needs to be permeable to those gases. And the gases also need to dissolve in the membrane and in the layer around the membrane, and so the gas exchange surface area needs to be moist. We're going to see in a moment how the lungs achieve all of these things. Now, in the case of smaller, perhaps flat organisms like a flatworm, it may not be the case that the animal needs a specialized gas exchange surface area. If every cell in the body is in close contact with the environment, then gases can just go in and out through the skin, and a specialized gas exchange surface area may not be necessary, but that's not the case in mammals like humans. So mammals have lungs. Here's a diagram of a lung, and let's trace the path of air down to the lungs. This is the windpipe that you can feel if you put your fingers on the front of your throat. You can feel these cartilaginous rings, and the proper term for that is the trachea. The trachea branches into a right and left main bronchus, that's these tubes here. Singular is bronchus, and plural, referring to both of them, is bronchi. The bronchi then divide into smaller branches called bronchioles. And those bronchioles actually have some smooth muscle in their wall to expand and contract, and it's in part because of contraction of that muscle that asthma attacks result in wheezing as the air has trouble getting in and out. So those small tubes are called bronchioles, and then the bronchioles end in sacs called alveoli, and that's where the gas exchange actually happens. Alveoli is in plural, and the singular is alveolus. On the right-hand side here, we see a close-up of the end of a bronchiole and then alveoli. And there are hundreds of millions of these alveoli, these little bubbles, in each lung, providing an enormous surface area. In fact, the surface area of the human lungs is together, both lungs, about 100 meters squared. That's about half the surface area of a tennis court. Compare that to the surface area of the outside of the body, which is less than 2 meters squared, and you can see that there is about a 50-fold increase in surface area. So we said that the gas exchange surface area needs to be large, and it is indeed large in the mammalian lung. It's also thin. Here we have capillaries that are going to the outside of the alveoli, and I can draw a little bit of a schematic of that with one alveolus and a capillary in close contact around it. And although there's a bit of a gap here, that's really, really small in the real situation. And we've got oxygen moving out from the alveolus into the capillary and carbon dioxide doing the reverse, again by diffusion across this thin permeable barrier. The other thing is that the surface is kept moist. There is liquid on the inside here around each alveolus, and because water and aqueous solutions have surface tension, those alveoli would actually tend to collapse because each of these dots here is representing water or aqueous solution. They try to pull together because water and its hydrogen bonds give it a lot of cohesion, and that would tend to collapse the alveoli. And so there are special cells that produce a detergent called surfactant, and that surfactant interrupts that surface tension and prevents the collapse of alveoli. And for newborns who are born very prematurely, so prematurely that their surfactant-producing cells in their lungs are not online yet, their alveoli actually will collapse from surface tension in the absence of this surfactant, and they need to be treated with surfactant in order to allow their alveoli to stay open. Now let's talk about ventilation, or the process of breathing. So fluids like air move from area of high pressure to areas of low pressure, and this property is harnessed in order to move air in and out. Remember that the reason we need to move air in and out is we need to continue to bring fresh air to the gas exchange surface so that there is a high concentration of oxygen, and that allows diffusion to continue. So Here is a diagram of the respiratory system, and there's a muscle down here, a sheet-like muscle called the diaphragm, that separates your abdomen from your thoracic cavity, your chest, and it can pull downwards. And in inhalation, your diaphragm contracts. That contraction of the diaphragm increases the volume of your thoracic cavity, of your chest, because in contracting, it's actually flattening out. And that increase in volume decreases the pressure of the air in your chest, because when you increase the volume of a gas at a fixed temperature, the pressure goes down, and therefore air rushes in. You can further increase the volume of your chest by moving your ribs up and out, and there are muscles in between your ribs called intercostal muscles. That means in between your ribs, and specifically here we're talking about the external intercostals, the ones on the outside. And when these external intercostals contract, they raise your ribs up and out, and that further increases the volume of your chest cavity, which decreases the pressure, and so air moves in. So inhalation is primarily the diaphragm contracting and flattening, but can also get some help from the external intercostals. Inhalation, or breathing in. Exhalation, breathing out, is the reverse. Now, actually, your lungs have an elastic property to them, and your diaphragm, when it relaxes, goes back to its domed state from being flattened. And so the combination of these two things means that exhalation, breathing out, is primarily passive recoil. It's primarily your lungs and your diaphragm just going back to their resting states. But at higher respiratory rate, R here stands for respiratory rate, meaning when you're breathing faster, you can get some help from other muscles. There are other intercostals, other muscles between your ribs called the internal intercostals. These ones are inside of the external intercostals, and they help to pull your ribs back down, and that decreases the volume in your chest and increases the pressure. And also your abdominal muscles, I haven't left myself enough space here, but your abdominal muscles contract and push your diaphragm up as well. If you squeeze the contents of your abdomen, they will push upwards into your diaphragm. And so the combination of the passive recoil and at higher respiratory rates, these other muscles can increase the pressure inside your chest, and then you breathe out, again, because fluid is moving from an area of high pressure to low pressure. So that's an overview of the mammalian respiratory system and the process of ventilation or breathing.